Opal walked into her own bedroom, 4 months pregnant, and found her husband and her best friend standing closer than strangers ever should. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And somehow, that silence was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Trust is not given because someone is close to you. Trust is earned because they have proven, repeatedly, that your pain matters more to them than their comfort. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there in the doorway, one hand resting on the small curve of her belly, and watched the two people she had built her entire world around slowly turn to face her, like they had been caught in slow motion, like time itself was too ashamed to move any faster. Gaspar Fiorentino, her husband, the man who ran the most feared crime family on the East Coast, the man who had held her face in both hands on their wedding night and whispered, "Nothing in this world touches you, not while I'm breathing." And Narissa Vane, her best friend since they were 17. The woman who had held Opal's hand through every hard season, every loss, every fear, every lonely night before Gaspar came into her life. The woman who had cried at their wedding, who had screamed with joy when Opal told her about the pregnancy, who had already picked out a name for the baby. Both of them in her bedroom, standing in a silence that told Opal everything before either of them found the courage to say a single word. Opal Whitfield had never been the kind of woman who flinched. She had grown up in a household where softness was treated like a liability. Her mother, a sharp-tongued woman from rural Georgia, had raised her with one rule: you can fall apart in private, never in front of anyone. So Opal had learned early how to keep her face still while everything behind it burned. That stillness was one of the first things Gaspar had noticed about her. They had met at a charity gala 3 years ago, the kind of event Opal had attended purely for work, camera around her neck, press badge clipped to her dress. She had been photographing the crowd when she felt someone watching her. She turned, and there he was, Gaspar Fiorentino. Dark suit, darker eyes, the kind of face that looked like it had been carved specifically to make people uncomfortable. He hadn't smiled at her. He had simply said, "You're the only person in this room who isn't performing." She had raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" He had almost smiled then. Almost. That was the beginning. Within 6 months, she was in his world. And his world was not small. The Fiorentino name stretched across 4 states, wrapped around businesses, both legitimate and otherwise. Feared in rooms Opal was never fully invited into. She had known who he was before she said yes to dinner. She had known the risks before she said yes to forever. What she had not known, what no one had warned her about, was that the most dangerous thing in Gaspar Fiorentino's world would not come from his enemies. It would come from inside her own home. Now she stood in the doorway, 4 months along, her baby quiet and still inside her, and she looked at Gaspar, really looked at him, and she waited for an explanation, for a lie, for anything that would make this make sense. But Gaspar Fiorentino, the man who had an answer for everything, the man who had talked his way out of federal investigations and family wars in rooms full of armed men who wanted him dead, said nothing. And that silence told Opal everything she needed to know. Hey, beautiful people, welcome, or welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here today. Genuinely. Before we go any further, can you drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from? It always means so much to see your names and cities pop up down there. You have no idea. And if you haven't subscribed or liked yet, please do it right now. Just tap that button. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything to this little community we're building together. Okay? Okay. Now let's get into this story, because I promise you, you are not ready. The people who witness your becoming are not always the ones who celebrate it. Sometimes they are simply studying you, learning exactly where you are softest, so they know where to press when the time comes. Opal Whitfield had never wanted the mafia life. That part was important because it would be easy. Looking at her now, living in a Fiorentino estate with security at every gate and silk drapes that cost more than her first car, to assume she had chased this, that she had seen Gasper's power and walked toward it with open hands. The truth was the opposite. She had tried to walk away from him twice. The first time was 4 months into dating, when she overheard a conversation she was never meant to hear. Low voices behind a closed door, a name mentioned with the kind of finality that meant someone would not be seeing another morning. She had picked up her coat and left without a word. Gasper had found her at her apartment 2 hours later. He hadn't begged. He hadn't threatened. He had simply sat across from her at her small kitchen table and told her the truth, all of it, and then said, "Now you decide, but you decide with real information, not fear." She had stayed. The second time was after their first real fight, 6 months before the wedding, when she realized that loving Gasper Fiorentino meant accepting that there would always be rooms she couldn't enter, decisions she couldn't question, and silences she had to trust without explanation. She had packed a bag, made it to the car. He had called before she started the engine. Opal, just her name, the way he said it, like it was the only word in the English language that still meant something to him, had undone her completely. She had gone back inside. People who didn't understand their relationship always asked the same question. What does a woman like her see in a man like him? What they never asked was the more interesting question. What does a man like him see in a woman like her? And the answer was simple. Gasper Fiorentino was surrounded, every single day, by people who needed something from him. Loyalty that was transactional. Affection that was strategic. Smiles that were worn like armor. In a world where everyone performed, Opal was the only person who simply was. She argued with him when he was wrong. She laughed at him when he was being dramatic. She fell asleep on his shoulder during his favorite films and felt no guilt about it whatsoever. She was real in a world made entirely of theater. And he had held on to that like a man who knew, deeply, that it was the rarest thing he would ever be given. Or so she had believed. Then there was Nerissa Vane. Nerissa was the kind of woman who filled a room without trying. Long natural hair, a laugh that started somewhere deep and came out loud. The sort of effortless warmth that made strangers feel like old friends within minutes. She and Opal had met at 17 in a community art class. Neither of them had wanted to attend. They had bonded over mutual disdain for the instructor, shared a bag of chips on the fire escape during the break, and had been inseparable from that day forward. Nerissa had been the first person Opal called when Gasper proposed. She had screamed so loud Opal had to hold the phone away from her ear. She had been maid of honor at the wedding. The speech she gave had made half the room cry, including, reportedly, 2 of Gasper's most senior lieutenants, though both of them denied it firmly afterward. And when Opal had called her, barely 8 weeks ago, whispering, "Nerissa, I'm pregnant," Nerissa had gone completely silent for 3 full seconds before dissolving into joyful, chaotic tears. "I'm going to be an auntie. I'm going to be the best auntie. Opal, I swear on everything." Opal had laughed until she cried too. That memory was sitting somewhere inside her chest right now, pressing against her ribs like something that had turned sharp overnight. Because here was what Opal was only beginning to understand, standing in that doorway. Nerissa had been inside the Fiorentino estate more times than Opal could count. She knew the layout. She knew the staff. She knew which evenings Gasper came home late and which nights Opal went to bed early because the pregnancy exhaustion hit her without warning. Nerissa knew everything. And Gasper, the man who trusted no one, who ran background checks on business partners he had known for a decade, who had once ended a 15-year friendship over a single unverified rumor, had let Nerissa in without question, without hesitation. Why? That question, small, quiet, devastating, was the first crack in the story Opal had been telling herself. And once a crack like that appears, it does not close. It spreads, slowly at first, then all at once. She was still standing in the doorway. Her hand was still on her belly, and the silence in that room was no longer just loud. It was deafening. Opal spoke first, not because she was ready, not because she had found the right words, but because the silence had stretched so long and so wide that staying inside it felt like slowly drowning. And she had a baby to protect, which meant she could not afford to drown. She looked directly at Gasper. "Tell me what I'm looking at." Her voice came out steady, low, the kind of calm that isn't peace. It's the flat surface of water right before something enormous moves underneath it. Gasper took one step toward her. She took one step back. He stopped. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something complicated and layered that she did not have the emotional vocabulary to translate right now. Standing barefoot in a hallway, 4 months pregnant, with her heart trying to exit her body through her sternum. "Opal, don't." She held up one hand. "Don't say my name like that. Don't make your voice go soft like that. Just tell me what I walked into." Nerissa moved then, stepped forward from the corner of the room where she had been standing motionless, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own body together. "Opal, it is not what you think." "Nerissa." Opal turned to look at her best friend, her only friend, really, the one person outside of Gasper she had trusted completely, and the look on her face made Nerissa go immediately silent. "I need you to let him speak first, because whatever comes out of his mouth will tell me how to feel about what comes out of yours." The room held its breath. Gasper exhaled slowly. He reached up and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. A gesture Opal recognized. He did it when he was choosing his words with surgical precision, when the wrong sentence could detonate something irreversible. "She came to me," he said finally, 3 weeks ago, without telling you." Opal's eyes narrowed. "About what?" Gasper looked at Nerissa briefly, just a flicker, then back at Opal. "About you." The next 4 minutes rearranged everything. Nerissa had come to Gasper privately, not to betray Opal, but because she had discovered something she was terrified to bring directly to her pregnant best friend. Something she had stumbled onto 6 weeks earlier, while helping Opal organize files for a freelance photography project. A name that appeared in Opal's old correspondence, buried in an email thread from 2 years ago, just before Opal and Gasper got engaged. A name that Nerissa, who had grown up on the south side of the city, recognized immediately. Cavalier Bruni, the man who ran the only crime family in the region that actively wanted Gaspare Fiorentino removed permanently, not rivaled, not negotiated with, removed. The email was brief, transactional, and it was written from an account registered under Opal's name. Nerissa had not gone to Gasper to hurt Opal. She had gone to him because she was terrified that someone had been using Opal's identity, or worse, that Opal had been placed inside Gasper's life deliberately, years before she even knew who he was. She had gone to him because she thought Opal might be in danger. And she had come today because Gasper had finally found confirmation of what that email meant. And Nerissa had insisted on being present when he told his wife the truth. Opal stood completely still. The word planted was circling her mind like smoke. She couldn't clear. Planted. As in, what if her meeting with Gasper at that gala had not been coincidence? What if the charity event she had been assigned to cover, last minute, by an editor she had never met before and never heard from again? What if that had been engineered? What if 3 years of her life had been constructed around her without her knowledge? What if the love was real, but the introduction was not? Her hand pressed harder against her belly. The baby shifted. And Opal Whitfield, who never flinched, who had been raised to fall apart only in private, felt the walls she had spent her entire life building develop something she had no framework for. A crack she could not explain, a fear she could not name, and one question, rising above all the others, that would drive every decision she made from this moment forward. If someone built this life around me, without my knowledge, what else don't I know? Opal did not sleep that night. She lay in the guest room. She had moved there without discussion, and Gasper had not argued, which told her he understood exactly why, and she stared at the ceiling with both hands resting on her stomach, running through every memory she had of the last 3 years like a film she was now watching with different eyes. The gala. The editor who had assigned her last minute. A woman named Petra Saul, whom Opal had tried to contact twice afterward for follow-up work and never reached again. At the time, she had assumed the woman had moved on. Changed companies. The industry was transient like that. Now, she lay in the dark and thought. Or, she was never really there to give you work at all. The first date with Gasper. He had taken her to a small restaurant in the West Village. Private, no reservation required because the owner simply cleared a table when he walked in. Opal had assumed it was his influence. His name. She had teased him about it over the pasta course, and he had laughed. Genuinely laughed, the rare kind that reached his eyes. And she had thought, this man is not as untouchable as he wants people to believe. Now she thought, or the table was already set before you arrived. Every warm memory had a cold shadow living behind it now. And that was the cruelest part of what had been done to her. Not just the potential manipulation, but the way it had reached backward through time and contaminated things that had been good. Things that had been hers. By morning, Opal had made a decision. She was not going to wait for Gasper's investigation to deliver her answers. She was going to find them herself. She dressed 8, because the baby required it regardless of how she felt, and walked into Gasper's study where he was already awake, already working, dark circles beneath his eyes confirming he had not slept either. He looked up when she entered. She sat across from him without being invited, and placed both hands flat on his desk. I want everything you have on Cavalier Bruni. Every document, every photograph, every name connected to his operation. Gasper studied her for a long moment. Opal, I'm not asking as your wife right now, she said quietly. I'm asking as the person whose identity was apparently used as a weapon. I have a right to know who did this and how deep it goes. He held her gaze. Then he opened the desk drawer and slid a folder across to her. She opened it. The first page was a photograph, and the face looking back at her from that photograph was one she recognized. Not from the mafia world, not from Gasper's circles, not from any dark corner of the life she had married into. She recognized it from her own past. Long before Gasper, long before the gala, long before any of this. Her hand stopped moving. Who is this man to Bruni? She asked, her voice dropping to almost nothing. His most trusted strategist, Gasper said. Has been for 11 years. goes by different names depending on the city. Opal stared at the photograph. "I know him," she said. "I've known him since I was 19. The name she said next made Gaspar go very, very still. It was the name of a man who had been a peripheral presence in Opal's life for years. Never central, never demanding, always just there. The kind of person you don't think to question, because they never ask for anything obvious. Her old university photography mentor, the man who had encouraged her to take the freelance path, who had, now that she forced herself to remember clearly, been the one who first mentioned the name of the agency that eventually led her to Petrosol, who had, in fact, been the one who suggested she attend that gala. "He told me it would be good for my portfolio," Opal said, almost to herself. "He said the lighting in that venue was extraordinary." The silence that followed was a different kind than the one in the bedroom yesterday. That silence had been shock. This one was something colder. This was the silence of two people sitting across from each other, realizing simultaneously that the architecture of their entire relationship had been drawn by someone else's hand, and that the someone else had been standing close enough to Opal for long enough to know exactly how to move her like a piece on a board without her ever once feeling the hand. Gaspar closed the folder carefully. When he looked at her again, something had shifted behind his eyes. The investigation had just become something different. Something personal in a way that went beyond territory and power and family name. Someone had used his wife. Someone had used her before she even knew him. And that person was about to discover, in the most concrete terms possible, exactly what the Fiorentino name meant when it stopped being a warning and became a consequence. The truth does not always arrive gently. Sometimes it comes all at once, loud, disorienting, and impossible to unfeel. But a truth that hurts you is still infinitely more useful than a comfortable lie that controls you. His name was Roscoe Delamere, and for 11 years, he had been the most invisible man in Opal Whitfield's life. Not invisible in the way of strangers. Invisible in the way of wallpaper. Present so consistently, so quietly, that the eye simply stopped registering him as something worth examining. He had been her photography mentor at 20, her professional reference at 23, a warm voice on the phone every few months checking in with the particular gentleness of someone who genuinely cared. Except he hadn't genuinely cared. He had been assigned to her. Opal sat in Gaspar's study for 3 hours that morning, going through everything. The documents, the financial trails, the communication intercepts his team had been quietly assembling for the past 3 weeks since Narissa first brought the email forward. And piece by piece, the picture assembled itself in front of her with the horrible, inexorable clarity of a photograph developing in a darkroom. Roscoe Delamere had been placed in her life when she was 19 years old. Not because of Gaspar. Gaspar had not even been on Cavalier Bruni's radar at 19. The original target had been Opal's father. Opal's hand stopped turning pages. Her father, Cornelius Whitfield, had died when she was 21. A car accident on a wet highway outside of Atlanta. Clean, tragic, unremarkable. The kind of loss that breaks a young woman open and leaves her rebuilding herself from whatever pieces remain. She had spent years rebuilding. She had never once questioned the accident itself. Now she sat with a document in her hands, an internal communication between Roscoe Delamere and a financial intermediary connected to Bruni's operation, and she read a single line that made the room tilt sideways. CW asset neutralized. Daughter remains viable long-term. Maintain proximity. C.W. Cornelius Whitfield. Asset neutralized. Her father had not died in an accident. And Opal, his daughter, his only child, the person who had scattered his ashes in the Georgia River he loved, and then spent years learning how to breathe again without him, had been kept alive and cultivated as a long-term resource by the same people who took him. The sound that came out of her was not a cry. It was something beneath language. Something that started in her chest and ended in her hands, which had gone completely cold. Gasper was beside her before she could process that he had moved. He didn't speak. He simply sat next to her on the edge of the desk, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and waited, because he understood, having lost his own father to this world at 16, that there are moments where presence is the only thing another human being can offer, and words are an insult to the size of the grief. She let herself lean into him, just for a moment, just long enough to remember that she was not alone inside this. Then she straightened, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and looked at the document again, with eyes that had stopped being sad and started being something far more focused. "He's been watching me for 11 years, she said quietly, "which means he knows things about me that I haven't told anyone." "Yes," Gasper said, "which means he knows about the pregnancy." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Gasper's jaw tightened. "We believe so. Then this isn't just about you and Bruni anymore." She turned to look at her husband, fully, directly, with the kind of clarity that only arrives after something inside you has burned completely down and left clean ground behind. "He's been building toward something with me specifically for over a decade. And now I'm pregnant with a Fiorentino heir." She watched Gasper connect the same dots she had just connected. The strategic value of an heir, the leverage, the particular cruelty of a plan that had the patience to wait 11 years for its moment. "He's not coming after your empire," Opal said slowly. "He's coming after what's inside me." 3 floors below them, in the security room, one of Gasper's most trusted guards, a man named Silvano Drago who had been with the family for 8 years, quietly sent a single encrypted message from a burner phone he had kept taped beneath his workstation for 6 months. He did not know that the estate's new surveillance system, installed 4 weeks ago, had a secondary logging function that his employer had told no one about. He did not know that Gasper had been watching him for 3 of those 6 months. And he did not know that the message he had just sent had been automatically flagged, copied, and delivered to the device in Gasper Fiorentino's left jacket pocket, which vibrated once, quietly, as Gasper sat beside his wife in the study. Gasper glanced at the screen. Read the message. Put the phone back in his pocket, without changing his expression. The leak was inside the house, and now he knew exactly who it was. Part 6. The Darkest Hour. Moral lesson. Isolation is not always a locked door or a guarded gate. Sometimes it is the quiet removal of every person you trusted one by one until you are standing in a full house that feels completely empty. And that is when you are most vulnerable to the thing coming for you. Gasper moved fast. Within the hour, Silvano Drago was removed from the security room, quietly, efficiently, with a particular coldness that Gasper reserved for betrayals that came from inside his own walls. No scene. No confrontation in front of the staff. Just 2 men Gasper trusted absolutely appearing at Silvano's shoulder and walking him out of the building with the calm professionalism of people who had done this before. Opal watched from the upstairs window. Silvano looked up once before he was guided into the car. She did not look away. What happened next was presented to her as protection. Gasper came to her that evening and explained, in careful, measured words, that until he had fully dismantled Bruni's network and confirmed there were no remaining access points inside the estate, he needed to move her. Somewhere off the grid. Somewhere that had not been compromised. A safe house in upstate New York. Small. Staffed by 2 people he trusted with his own life. His aunt, Carmela Fiorentino, a woman in her 60s who had survived things that would have ended most people, and a private physician named Dr. Ren Afolabi, who had been the Fiorentino family's medical consultant for 15 years. No phones connected to her usual network. No contact with anyone outside the house, including Nerissa. For how long? Opal asked. Until it's done, Gasper said. She looked at him for a long moment. And how long is that? He didn't answer, which was, itself, an answer. The safe house was beautiful in the way that gilded cages are beautiful, surrounded by trees, clean air, a river visible from the bedroom window that caught the light in the early morning and turned it into something almost peaceful. Carmela was warm and steady, and made food that smelled like a history Opal wasn't part of, but somehow found comforting. Dr. Afolabi checked on her daily, monitored the baby, spoke to her with the quiet competence of someone who understood that a pregnant woman's emotional state was not separate from her physical one. The baby was fine. She was not fine. By the fourth day, the silence had changed texture. It had started as stillness, the absence of threat, the absence of noise, the enforced quiet of a woman being kept safe. But by the fourth night, lying in a bed that wasn't hers, in a house she hadn't chosen, cut off from every thread of her own life, the stillness had curdled into something that pressed against her from the inside. She had no information. Gasper called twice a day. Brief, careful conversations that told her he was alive and working, but revealed nothing about what he was finding or how close the end was. She could hear the control in his voice, the deliberate containment of details he had decided she didn't need. And that, the being managed, the being handled, the being protected in a way that felt indistinguishable from being sidelined, was what finally broke through the composure she had been maintaining since the moment she stood in that doorway 4 days ago. She called Gasper on the fourth night, and when he answered, she did not give him the chance to speak first. "I need you to tell me what is actually happening," she said. "Not the version you've edited for my benefit. The real version." A pause. Opal. Gasper. Her voice dropped. "I found out 4 days ago that the man who mentored me for years was placed in my life by the same people who killed my father. I am 4 months pregnant, alone in a house in the woods, and you are asking me to trust a silence you keep choosing. I need more than that. I deserve more than that." The pause that followed was longer. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The careful management was gone. What replaced it was something raw, the voice of a man who was exhausted and frightened in a way he did not know how to wear. "Bruni knows where you are," he said quietly. "We found a second leak this morning. Someone on the transport team. The air left her lungs. He's known since the first day," Gasper continued, "which means the safe house was never safe. I've been trying to confirm an alternate location while keeping you calm enough to, while keeping me calm," she repeated softly. The words tasted like something metallic. "Gasper, there is a man who had my father killed, who has been watching me for 11 years, who knows I'm pregnant and knows exactly where I am, and you have been managing my emotions instead of telling me the truth." "Silence. I'm moving you tonight," he said. "I'm coming myself. How far out are you?" 2 hours. She looked at the window, at the dark tree line beyond the glass, at the river that had seemed peaceful 4 days ago, and now looked like a boundary she had been foolish to find beautiful. "Then I'll be ready," she said. She ended the call, turned to find Carmela standing in the doorway of the bedroom, watching her with the steady eyes of a woman who had spent 40 years in this world and had learned to read danger the way others read weather. "You heard," Opal said. "Enough," Carmela replied. She held out a coat. "Put this on. We're not waiting 2 hours. Strength is not the absence of fear. It is the decision, made quietly, in the dark, with everything on the line, that what you are protecting matters more than how frightened you are. That decision is available to every single person, including you. Carmela Fiorentino did not move like a woman in her 60s. She moved like someone who had spent decades understanding that hesitation was a luxury this life did not offer. Within 4 minutes of telling Opal to put her coat on, she had killed the lights in the safe house, woken Dr. Afolabi with 3 sharp knocks and a single sentence. "We're leaving. Bring the medical bag," and guided both of them through the back of the house and into the tree line via a path that Opal was certain had not been on any floor plan she'd seen. "You've done this before," Opal said quietly as they moved through the dark, her hand in Carmela's, the cold air sharp against her face. "3 times," Carmela replied, without slowing. "Once for myself. Once for Gasper's mother. Once for a woman who didn't make it out because she waited too long. A beat. I don't lose people twice the same way." Opal said nothing more. She focused on her footing, on her breathing, on the steady, quiet rhythm of the life inside her that she was going to get out of these woods if it was the last coherent decision she ever made. They reached a secondary road a quarter-mile from the house, a dirt track half hidden by overgrowth that emerged onto a 2-lane highway running north. Carmela made a call. 11 minutes later, a dark car with no plates pulled up without headlights, and a woman Opal had never seen stepped out. 40s, close-cropped hair, the particular economy of movement that suggested military or law enforcement somewhere in her history. "Femi Adora," the woman said, extending a hand to Opal. "I work with your husband. The other side of his work." Opal shook it. "What other side?" Femi glanced at Carmela, who gave a small nod. "Gasper has been cooperating with a federal task force for 14 months, Femi said, quietly, selectively. He's been feeding information on Bruni's network in exchange for a structured exit from the organization. Clean, documented, legal protection for his family." She paused. "You are the reason he started the process." The pregnancy accelerated the timeline. The highway was empty in both directions. Wind moved through the trees above them. Dr. Afolabi stood quietly to the side, medical bag over one shoulder, asking no questions. Opal absorbed what she had just been told. Her husband. The man she had married knowing who he was, the man she had feared she could never fully reach, had been trying to get out. Not because the pressure had become too great. Not because the risk calculation had shifted. Because of her. Because of the child she was carrying. He had been dismantling the only world he had ever known. Brick by careful brick, in complete silence. Because he had decided that what waited on the other side, a life with her, a child, something ordinary and real and ungoverned by violence, was worth more than the empire he had inherited. And Bruni had discovered it. That was what this was. This was not a power play over territory. This was Cavalier Bruni eliminating the man who was about to hand 14 months of intelligence on his operation to the federal government, and using Opal to do it. Her phone, the clean one Carmela had handed her before they left the house, buzzed. "Gasper," she answered immediately. "Where are you?" His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something stripped bare. The specific fear of a man who had arrived at a location and found it empty. "With Carmela," she said, "and Femi Adora." A sharp exhale. "You know." "I know," she confirmed. 3 seconds of silence. "I was going to tell you," he said, "when it was finished. When I could hand you the exit and not just the process." "I know that too," she said quietly. "We're going to talk about all of it later. Right now, I need you to tell me where to go." "I'm 12 minutes from your position," he said. "Don't move. I'm coming to you." She lowered the phone, looked at Carmela, who was watching her with something that had softened from vigilance into something almost tender. "He's a good man," Carmela said simply. "He has made this world difficult to see that in. But he is." Opal looked at the dark road ahead, at the trees, standing still on either side like witnesses, at the faint gray suggestion of dawn beginning somewhere beyond the horizon, barely visible, barely there, but undeniably present. "I know," she said, and for the first time in 6 days, she meant it without reservation. When Gasper's car came around the bend and the headlights swept across the road and found her standing there, coat pulled around her, one hand on her belly, chin up, he was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped. He crossed the distance between them in 4 strides. He didn't speak. He just put both arms around her, carefully, the way you hold something you nearly lost, and pressed his face against the side of her head and stayed there. She felt him exhale, the whole weight of 14 months, leaving his body in a single breath. She held on. They moved before sunrise. Gasper had spent the 2 hours driving to Opal finalizing the last coordinated sequence with Femi's task force. 14 months of preparation collapsing into a single operational window that would not stay open long. Bruni had discovered the cooperation, which meant Bruni would move. And a man like Cavalier Bruni, cornered and aware that his network was about to be handed to federal prosecutors, was exponentially more dangerous than one who still believed he had time. The window was now. It was Opal who said it first. Standing beside the car on that dark road, Gasper's arms still around her, she had pulled back just far enough to look at him clearly and said, "Tell me what you need from me." He had looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent 6 days absorbing revelations that would have dismantled most people, who had walked through dark woods while 4 months pregnant rather than sit in a compromised house and wait, who was looking at him right now, not with accusation or exhaustion, but with the particular focused calm that he had fallen in love with on a crowded gala floor 3 years ago. "There's one piece I can't get without you," he said. Roscoe Delamere did not know that Opal knew. That was the asset. He had been monitoring her through Silvano's access for months. Her location, her routines, the broad strokes of her emotional state as reported by a man who watched security feeds and relayed impressions. But Silvano had been removed 4 days ago, and the second leak on the transport team had been quietly fed false information since the moment Gasper identified him, which meant Roscoe's picture of Opal's current state was built entirely on data that Gasper's team had been carefully constructing for him. He believed she was frightened, isolated, beginning to crack under the pressure of not understanding what was happening around her. He believed she was reachable. So when Opal called him, from a number he recognized, her voice carrying exactly the right texture of a woman who had been alone too long and needed the familiar comfort of someone she trusted, he answered on the second ring. Opal. Warm. Concerned. 11 years of practiced care delivered in 2 syllables. "I've been worried about you." "I know," she said. "I need to see you. I don't know who else to call." A pause. Brief, calculated. "Of course. Tell me where you are." She told him. The location Gasper's team had prepared. Roscoe Delamere walked into a federal operation 47 minutes later. He came alone, which confirmed what Femi's team had suspected, that he preferred to handle Opal personally, that whatever his instructions from Bruni were regarding the pregnancy and the leverage it represented, he intended to execute them without witnesses. He did not make it past the front entrance. Femi's team moved the moment he cleared the door. Clean, swift, the particular efficiency of people who had been waiting 14 months for this specific moment and had no intention of fumbling it. Roscoe was in federal custody before he fully processed that the woman he had been manipulating since she was 19 years old had just been the one to close the trap around him. Cavalier Bruni was taken into custody at his primary residence in Philadelphia at 6:47 that same morning. He had been in the middle of breakfast. The charges were extensive: racketeering, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and a financial crimes portfolio that Gasper's 14 months of cooperation had documented with the kind of precision that left prosecutors describing it, privately, as the cleanest federal case they had built in a decade. Bruni said nothing when they walked him out. He was the kind of man who understood when it was over, that it was over. Opal was sitting in the back of a car with Carmela when Femi called with confirmation. She listened, said, "Thank you," ended the call. Carmela was watching her. "It's done," Opal said. Carmela reached over and covered Opal's hand with hers, a gesture so simple and so human that Opal felt the last 6 days pressing against the back of her eyes all at once. She did not cry. Not yet. She looked out the window at the morning. Fully arrived now, pale gold light moving across a landscape that looked entirely ordinary, entirely unaware of what had just concluded inside it. And she let herself feel the particular, unfamiliar weight of a danger that was genuinely gone. Her phone buzzed. "Gasper," she answered. "It's done," he said. His voice was quiet, tired in the way that only comes after something long has finally ended. "I know," she said. Femi called. A breath. "Are you okay?" She considered the question honestly, the way she always did, the way that had always made him look at her like she was something he couldn't fully account for. "I will be," she said. "Come find me." 20 minutes, he said. She lowered the phone. Outside, the light was getting stronger. Inside her, the baby moved, slow, certain, unhurried, as if confirming something Opal was only just beginning to fully believe, that they were going to be all right, that the life on the other side of all of this was still there, still waiting, still entirely possible. Part 9. The satisfying conclusion. Closing moral lesson. The life you were meant to have does not always arrive on schedule. Sometimes it comes after the loss, after the betrayal, after the woods in the dark and the roads with no headlights. But it comes. And when it does, built on truth instead of illusion, on chosen loyalty instead of manufactured proximity, it is more yours than anything that came before it. Hold it carefully. You earned it. 3 weeks after Cavalier Bruni was walked out of his Philadelphia residence in handcuffs, Opal sat on the back porch of a house she had never seen before and decided quietly and without fanfare that she loved it. It was not the estate. The estate was gone, sold cleanly, as part of the structured exit agreement Gasper had been building for 14 months. The new house was smaller, considerably smaller. Set on 2 acres outside of a town in Connecticut that had 1 coffee shop, 1 grocery store, and the particular unhurried quality of a place that had never needed to be impressive. Gasper had brought her here the morning after everything concluded, when they had both finally slept, really slept, the unguarded kind, and he had stood in the kitchen of this house, making coffee with the focused seriousness he applied to everything, and she had leaned in the doorway watching him and thought, there he is, the man underneath all of it. There he actually is. She had not said it out loud. She hadn't needed to. He had looked up, caught her expression, and something in his face had simply opened, like a door that had been held shut for a very long time, finally given permission to move. They talked for 4 days straight. Not the managed, careful conversations of the safe house phone calls. Real ones. The kind that started over dinner and migrated to the porch and continued past midnight and picked back up over breakfast the next morning. About his father. About hers. About the 14 months of a secret he had carried alone because he hadn't known how to hand her something unfinished. about the 2 times she had tried to leave, and what it had cost her to come back, about what they wanted the next chapter to actually look like. On the 3rd night, sitting on that back porch with a blanket over her lap and the Connecticut dark surrounding them, Opal said, "You should have told me about the cooperation, about all of it." "Yes," Gasper said. "No qualification, no defense. I need you to promise me that the version of us that exists from here forward doesn't have rooms I'm not allowed into." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I promise you that." She looked at him. "I know you mean that right now." "I'll mean it every day," he said. "And on the days I forget, you have my full permission to remind me with whatever level of force you consider appropriate." She laughed, the real kind, sudden and unguarded, and it startled them both. He smiled, the rare kind, the one that reached everything. "There," he said softly. "There you are." Nerissa came on a Thursday. Opal had called her herself, not because the situation had been fully processed, not because every complicated feeling had been resolved, but because 5 weeks without her best friend had clarified something important. The friendship was real. It had always been real. Nerissa had gone to Gasper out of love so panicked. It had bypassed good judgment. And she had spent 5 weeks living with the consequences of that decision in a silence that Opal suspected had been its own particular punishment. Nerissa arrived at the front door with red eyes and a baby gift so enormous it barely fit through the entrance. And when Opal opened the door and they looked at each other, full weight of everything that had passed between them hovering in the air, Nerissa said, "I should have come to you first. I was scared and I made the wrong call, and I am so—" Opal pulled her inside. "I know," she said. "Come in." Gasper made food. Nerissa laughed through tears. "Gasper cooks?" "Apparently. It's one of approximately 11,000 things about him I'm still discovering." They sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. Gasper made himself scarce with the particular emotional intelligence of a man who understood when a room belonged to someone else. Nerissa held Opal's hands across the table, and they talked, honestly, painfully, and by the end of it, cleanly. The kind of conversation that doesn't erase what happened, but builds something new on top of it. Something sturdier than what was there before. 6 weeks later, at 4:17 in the morning, Opal's daughter arrived. She came into the world with considerable opinion and no patience for delay. Characteristics that Dr. Afolabi noted with professional diplomacy suggested a strong personality. Gasper, who had spent the previous 11 hours demonstrating that the most feared man in 4 states was entirely undone by his wife's pain, held his daughter for the first time with the particular stillness of someone encountering something that has permanently rearranged the order of everything they value. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, very quietly, he said her name. They had chosen it together. A name that belonged to no one else in the family, carried no history of obligation or expectation. A name that was simply hers. Solene. Opal watched her husband hold their daughter in the blue-gray light of a Connecticut morning and felt something settle inside her that she didn't have precise language for. Not happiness, exactly. Though happiness was present. Something wider than that. Something that had weight and texture and the specific quality of a thing that has been hard-won. Peace. The real kind. The kind you don't stumble into. The kind you build through the dark and the woods and the roads without headlights. One true thing at a time. Outside the window, the sun was coming up over the 2 acres that were theirs now. Ordinary. Unhurried. Entirely ungoverned by anyone else's design. Exactly what they had both. In different ways and over different years. Been quietly moving toward. Home. You cannot always control what is built around you, but you can control what you choose to build next, and who you choose to build it with. Start there. Build slowly. Build honestly. That is the only foundation that holds. And that's the story of Opal and Gasper Fiorentino. Drop a comment and tell me, what moment hit you the hardest? Was it the bedroom doorway? The document about her father? That road in the dark? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs it today. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, you have officially run out of reasons not to. Hit that button. I'll see you in the next story.